They say time devours all things. But what if you could stop it? What if there were a way to steal youth from the skin of another, to trap beauty in a chalice of blood? And what if someone actually tried? In the winter of 1610, when the snow around Cactus Castle turned an unnatural crimson, whispers stirred through the hills of northern Hungary. The peasants told tales of screams that echoed through stone corridors, of maidens who entered but never returned. At the center of it all stood a woman, noble, radiant, and terrifying. Countess Elizabeth Báthory. To her servants, she was commandment and punishment. To the villagers, a curse in silk. And to history, a riddle soaked in blood. But Elizabeth wasn't born a monster. She was born into power. The Báthory name carried weight, forged in blood and war, intertwined with Transylvania's wild frontiers and the crest of Hungarian nobility. As a child, Elizabeth was said to be brilliant, fluent in Latin and Greek by the age of 9, with a memory that shamed her tutors. But brilliance, in a place where cruelty was currency, often twisted into something darker. By the time she was 13, she had seen more executions than kisses, heads spiked on gates, peasants broken on wheels. One tale claims she laughed the first time she saw a man flayed alive, though such accounts may be the lies of enemies, or may not. At 15, she was married to Ferenc Nadasti, a soldier nicknamed the Black Hero of Hungary, not for kindness, but for how he painted his enemies red. Together, they ruled the Carpathian estates, and together they discovered a shared taste for torment. They built a castle atop the spine of a hill where the sun rarely touched the earth. Inside, guests were welcomed with wine, harp music, and chandeliers lit like heaven. But beneath the marble floors was another world, one of iron shackles, bone saws, and silence that screamed louder than sound. Ferenc taught her techniques he'd learned on the battlefield: how to use honey to attract ants to saw flesh, how to freeze a woman to death with icy water under moonlight. And Elizabeth, she learned quickly. When her husband died in 1604, the darkness no longer needed to be hidden. It stepped into daylight, wearing her perfume. No longer bound by Ferenc's leash, Elizabeth began recruiting women from the countryside, peasants mostly, lured by promises of work or marriage into the castle gates, only to vanish into myth. She was careful at first, a missing girl here, a bruised maid dismissed. But as the years passed, her hunger grew. What exactly did she seek? Power? Revenge? Immortality? Or perhaps it was simpler. There is a tale, told in hushed tones across centuries, that one day a servant girl accidentally tugged too hard while brushing the Countess's hair. Elizabeth struck her, and blood splattered onto her pale hand. And in that moment, she swore the skin beneath looked younger, smoother, almost ageless. That night she ordered the girl killed. The next morning she bathed in the blood. From that moment she became a creature of obsession, not with pain, but preservation, not with cruelty, but with the illusion of eternity. Witnesses would later claim that entire chambers were converted into bloodbaths. Girls hung upside down by ropes, throats open like wine casks, blood collected in bowls, heated slightly to stay warm as she stepped in. Mirrors lined the walls so she could admire herself, dripping red like a goddess of war. But even gods fall. She began to grow reckless. Nobly born daughters were taken, their families too powerful to ignore. Whispers reached Vienna, and an investigation was launched. But justice, when aimed at the powerful, moved slowly, if at all. And so, the bloodletting continued, each act darker than the last, each death more desperate. And in her mind, the lines between age, death, and rebirth blurred into something religious. Elizabeth did not think herself evil. She thought herself eternal. She was not alone. Monsters like Elizabeth never dwell in solitude. They weave webs, and within those webs live willing hands, some terrified, some corrupted, and some simply fascinated. In the shadows of Cactus Castle, 4 such names would later echo through court transcripts like curses: Dorothea Sentes, Ilona Jo, Katerina Banica, and Janos Uivari, known as Fichko. Servants? Yes, but also disciples. It was Dorothea who designed the punishments. A former wet nurse turned torturer, she believed pain had a divine order. She crafted devices from iron and fire, tested poisons, etched scars like signatures across the girl's skin. Ilona, once a maid, became Elizabeth's right hand, dragging girls down into the depths, stripping them not just of clothes but of dignity, of identity. Katerina was quieter. She disposed of the remains. No one ever asked where the bones went. But it was Fichko, simple, brutish, broken, who buried the bodies. Some say he was a mute. Others say he sang lullabies as he dug. Together they formed a court of blood. And Elizabeth? She reigned. Yet no matter how many girls were bled, it was never enough. The mirror began to betray her. Her once flawless skin cracked beneath powders. Her eyes, once sharp as daggers, dimmed. Time, insulting, unrelenting time, continued its slow advance. And in her desperation, she crossed the line she had long tiptoed. She began taking girls of noble blood. Anna and Susanna, two sisters, daughters of a minor baron, vanished on their way to the castle. Their horses returned, riderless, splattered in red. Then came Maria, cousin to a merchant prince, who died screaming behind stone walls, her lungs punctured with hot irons. These weren't just disappearances anymore. These were declarations. The rumors had always existed, that Elizabeth bathed in blood, that she drank it mixed with honey and rosewater, that her castle floor was sticky beneath bare feet. But now the names were too important. Now the screams traveled farther. The king of Hungary, Matthias II, could no longer ignore it. He sent a man, not a soldier, but a lawyer, György Thurso, Palatine of Hungary, cold, meticulous, incorruptible. He had known Elizabeth in her youth. They had danced once, at a winter feast. He remembered her laughter like crystal. Now he returned not with flowers, but with chains. Thurso rode for Carthage in December 1610, arriving on the night of the 29th. The sky hung heavy with snow. The castle loomed ahead like a tomb carved from the mountain itself. And as his men approached, they saw no guards, no resistance, only silence and blood. In the great hall, the torches flickered to life and revealed horror. A girl lay sprawled across a bench, half naked, her skin punctured with dozens of needles. Another crawled toward the light, her hands shattered at the joints. A third, barely breathing, was found hanging by her wrist from an iron hook, her eyes wide open, frozen in some final, wordless prayer. All around them, the scent of iron and rot filled the air. It was not a home. It was a slaughterhouse. Elizabeth was found in her chamber, calm as snowfall. She did not flee, did not beg. She merely looked at Thurso, tilted her head and said, "Do you believe the tales?" He did not answer. In the days that followed, dozens of witnesses were summoned. Some told stories of secret passages, of black books in strange languages, of Elizabeth laughing as girls were torn apart by dogs. Others claimed they had helped wash blood from walls, carry buckets from cellar to chamber, or burn bodies in the forest. One young servant, barely more than a child herself, confessed that she once saw the Countess kiss a dead girl's lips. And then there were the confessions. Forced or real, no one could ever say for certain. Dorothea spoke of instruments too cruel to describe. Fichko, when beaten, whispered that the walls remembered. Ilona simply cried and asked if the Countess had betrayed her. The number of victims grew with each day. First 20, then 50, then over 300. In one document it is said Elizabeth herself kept a ledger, a small book bound in black leather in which she listed the names of her victims. When opened, it contained over 600 entries. 600, a number so obscene it defies comprehension. 600 dreams extinguished, 600 voices silenced, 600 mothers who never saw their daughters again. And still, she did not repent. When brought before the court, Elizabeth refused to speak. She stood proud, defiant, a noblewoman to the last breath. She denied nothing, but admitted even less. They dared not execute her. She was too powerful, too connected. Instead, they sentenced her to a tomb of stone. In August 1611, workers bricked her into a single room of her own castle. No windows, a single slit for food and air, a bed, a table, and her mirror. They say she talked to herself for months, whispered names, laughed, wept, sang. And then one day, she fell silent. Time passed, but the mirror no longer told her how much. In that sealed chamber, Elizabeth Báthory was left with only silence, and herself. The walls, once ornate with tapestry and candlelight, were now her only audience. Her fingers, once adorned with rings carved from obsidian and ruby, now clawed at stone. Her meals came once a day through a narrow slit, passed by hands that never dared meet her eyes. Yet she whispered, not to the guards, not to the priests who stood outside and crossed themselves whenever her name was spoken. She whispered to the air, to the mirror that hung across from her bed, the only thing she had demanded before the bricks were sealed. A mirror, cracked, fogged, ancient, but in her mind, still holy. Do you see me? She asked it. Do you see her? The girl who never aged? Some nights she claimed she did. She would stand in front of it and smile, run her fingers along the wrinkles at the corner of her lips and imagine them gone. She would tilt her head, pretend the veins in her hands weren't showing through the skin like rivers on parchment. She would recall the screams not as horrors, but as lullabies. But on other nights, the mirror turned cruel. It reflected back things she had not yet become, things she feared she already was. A crone, a beast, a mother of flies. Her hair, once dark as ravens, thinned into patches. Her skin sagged, her eyes clouded, and worse, her memory began to splinter. Names swirled in her skull like ash. Clara, Ilka, Zofia. Were they her victims, her servants, or figments she had stitched together from guilt and madness? She began to write on the walls using her own blood. Symbols, names, prayers in twisted Latin. She scratched them beneath the mirror. She whispered them while dreaming. She asked the stones to remember for her, to become her new book of death. Some say she believed the room was alive, that it pulsed at night with the heartbeat of all the girls she had killed, that their breath came through the cracks, chilling her spine, that sometimes when the wind blew just right through the air slit, she could smell lavender, the perfume she once made from crushed bones and oil. And still she refused confession. Priests were sent again and again, men of God with trembling hands, and crucifixes thrust forward like swords. They asked her to repent, to kneel, to name her sins and beg forgiveness. She smiled, or laughed, or sat motionless, eyes glazed over, humming some childhood melody from the forests of Exod. There was a rumor, spoken only once in court, then struck from the record, that she claimed to be pregnant with a spirit, that the blood of virgins had allowed her to conceive something not born of man, but of the old gods, the ones buried beneath Hungary's pagan hills. A child who would rise when her bones turned to dust, to reclaim her name and her vengeance. That rumor was never proven, but it spread like wildfire. In villages nearby, mothers whispered warnings to their daughters. Never stray too far at dusk, lest the Countess calls you from the grave. Never offer your blood to the wrong prayer. Never trust mirrors that don't reflect your breath. Years passed, and slowly the stories began to change. She became a legend, then a fairy tale, then a nightmare told to frighten children. Some said she had fangs, others that her castle vanished at night, reappearing only to those whose hearts were pure. Some claimed her soul was bound to a necklace, or a ring, or a painting hidden in the dungeons of Vienna. But history is a poor mourner. It forgets what it fears, and Elizabeth Báthory was feared. On August 21st, 1614, a guard passed food through the wall and received no reply. He waited, then called, then pushed harder, no sound. When the stone was removed 3 days later, they found her collapsed beside the bed, her hair like cobwebs, her skin translucent as wax. The mirror had fallen, shattered across the floor. Some said it broke the night she died. Others claimed it cracked the moment she accepted she was old. There were no last words, only silence. No funeral, no procession. Her body was buried in secrecy in a church that later denied it. To this day, no one knows where her bones lie. Some say they were burned, others say they still rest beneath cactus, pulsing with the same rhythm as before. But the blood stains, they never faded. Farmers claimed the earth around the castle remained dark, as if poisoned. Animals refused to graze near the ruins. Birds circled above but never landed. And at night, under certain moons, people swore they could hear singing, soft, feminine, terrible. And the mirror, it was never found. Centuries passed. Castles crumbled. Kingdoms died. The names of kings were buried beneath the dust of revolutions. Yet hers, Elizabeth Báthory, remained etched into the stones like a bloodstain time refused to wash away. But who was she, truly? A murderess, a myth, a misunderstood woman caught in the snares of patriarchal vengeance? Historians debated. Some claimed the number, 600, was an invention, a symbol, not a statistic. That her political enemies, hungry for her lands and titles, conspired to stain her name. They point to the absence of trial records, to the fact that Elizabeth never once stood before a judge, that everything we know came from frightened peasants and tortured servants. Others say that's precisely the brilliance of her evil. She never needed a courtroom. Her crimes were her court, her victims the testimony, her silence, the sentence. And yet, even in silence, she speaks. In 1720, a Jesuit priest named Father Miklos claimed to have discovered her private journal, hidden in the decaying beams of Cactus Castle. The pages were stained, written in code, fragmented, but among the legible lines was a single phrase repeated over and over. In youth I was beautiful, in death I am eternal. The journal vanished soon after. Some say the church destroyed it, others say it was never real, but the words remained, whispered between the spines of old books and the tongues of the curious. In 1817, a Hungarian noblewoman touring the ruins claimed she heard voices echo from the cellars, singing in Latin, repeating the names of girls long dead. In 1901, a scholar went mad after spending a night alone in the dungeon, scribbling passages about mirrors that breathe and walls that bleed. And in 1944, during the chaos of the Second World War, German soldiers occupying the area reported that their dogs refused to enter the castle. One diary recovered after the war claimed they found a hidden room filled with old bones, some human, some not. But perhaps the strangest tale of all came from 1982. A private art collector in Vienna purchased an antique mirror rumored to have belonged to the Báthory estate, ornate, cracked, and cold to the touch. He displayed it in his study. Within weeks, he began dreaming of a woman in red silk, standing behind him, whispering names in a tongue he did not understand. Then came the obsession. He stopped eating, stopped speaking, sat before the mirror for hours, transfixed, convinced it was showing him things beyond the veil of time. When his body was found, the mirror was shattered. Carved into his desk were 4 words: "She still watches me." Today, Cactus Castle is a ruin. Tourists come, they take pictures, they laugh, but the locals still warn. Do not linger after dark. Do not touch the stones. And if you find an old mirror lying among the weeds, walk away. Because Elizabeth Báthory, Countess of Blood, has never truly left. She lives in the creak of forgotten corridors, in the wind that stirs the dead branches, in every story told at candlelight about a woman who went too far. She is the breath on your neck when no one is behind you, the shadow in the corner of your eye. The question that remains after all else is said: what would you do to stay beautiful forever? Look into the mirror. Do you see her, or do you see yourself? Because in the end, perhaps the real horror was never Elizabeth. Perhaps the true darkness lies in the part of us that envies her, that understands her, that might have done the same. And perhaps that's why her legend still bleeds through time. Not because it is too monstrous to believe, but because it is too human to forget.